The Country of the Blind. Part 1. Our story begins in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador, hundreds of years past. Between two great mountains, there was a small, beautiful valley. It was a difficult, dangerous journey from the nearest town. One day, some people from Peru found the valley, and they stayed there. The water was clean, and there was fruit on the trees. Their animals gave them milk. There was no rain or snow, but the rivers from the mountains made the valley green. They could grow vegetables there. It was a wonderful place. The people built a village in the valley, and their lives were happy. But then some of them were ill, and after this they couldn't see. New babies were born blind too. After many, many years, everybody in the valley was blind. But in the time before that happened, some of the men had an answer to the problem. God is angry with us because there isn't a church in the village, they said. One man had a plan. Let's build a church, he said. I'll go away to the town and buy the best things for our church, and I'll bring them back to our valley. The people gave him money. They did this happily, because they didn't use money in the village. A new church will make God happy, and then He will help us. We'll have our sight again, they said. So the young man made the difficult, dangerous journey over the mountains to the town. He told people in the town about his village, and he visited many churches. Then he bought the things for the new church, and he was ready for the journey home. But one day, when he was in the town, something very bad happened near his valley. It was the middle of the day, but the sky suddenly went dark. The birds stopped singing. Animals put their heads up and listened. Then they started running away. There was a loud noise, and the ground moved. The mountains moved, and large rocks fell down into the valley. The people were very afraid. After some minutes, it was quiet, and everything stopped moving. Then the sun shone again, and the birds sang. But things were different. The country didn't look the same as before. The young man wanted to go back to his valley, but he couldn't find the way through the mountains. There were rocks across the mountain paths, and there was no way past them. He couldn't get home to his wife and children in the valley. He had to stay in the town. He told many people about his village. So more and more people heard the story of the country of the blind. Hundreds of years later, another young man came into the story. His name was Nunez, and he was a mountain climber from the Colombian city of Bogota. He took some Englishmen on a journey high in the Andes Mountains. They stopped for the night near the top of a mountain. Suddenly, they couldn't see Nunez. "Nunez! Nunez! Where are you?" they shouted. They called to him, but he didn't answer. They couldn't sleep. In the morning, they looked everywhere, but they couldn't find Nunez. "Look," said one of the men. "Look at his path through the snow. He walked here, and he fell there." They looked down. A long, long way below, they could see the top of some trees. The trees were in a small valley at the bottom of the mountains. It was the country of the blind. But of course, the Englishmen didn't know that. "We have to get down there and find Nunez," said one of them. "Why? He's dead," said another man. "And we can't get there. There's no way down the mountain from here," said a third man. "Only a very long fall." "We can do nothing. We can't help Nunez now. Let's go back." So the Englishmen left the mountain and went down to the town with their story of Nunez's fall. But Nunez was not dead. He fell through the snow and then over the snow. He fell 1,000 meters and more. The snow fell with him. It made a thick bed for him when he stopped falling. He didn't move for a long time. He was hurt, but he didn't die. He looked up at the mountain, and he looked down into the valley. It was night, so he couldn't see the village. "Perhaps I can get help in the morning," he thought. He moved slowly out of the snow. Then he found a warm place for the night, and he went to sleep. He woke up early the next morning, when the birds started to sing. Nunez sat up and looked round. He was near the valley at the bottom of the mountains. He could see some houses and a river below him. "Somebody there will help me," he thought. He started walking down to the village. It was difficult, because he was very tired. He went carefully, because he didn't want to fall again. By the end of the day, he was at the river, and he stopped for a drink. There were beautiful flowers near the river. "This is a lovely place," Nunez thought. There were a lot of small houses in the center of the village. They looked very strange to him because they didn't have any windows. He could see men and women at work in the village. Some were in the fields with their children. He could see gardens near the houses, and there were fine vegetables in them. When Nunez was near the village, he shouted to some men. "Hello!" he shouted. "Hello! Hello!" And he waved his arms. The men heard him, and they turned their heads. They looked one way, and then the other way. They looked past Nunez, but they didn't look at him. "Why can't they see me?" he thought. Nunez moved nearer and shouted again. He was now quite near 3 men. He waved again, but they didn't wave back to him. What's wrong with them? He thought. Are they blind? He walked down to the men, and then he saw their faces. He was right. The men were all blind. They had no eyes. "Who is this?" one man asked his friend. "A man? Or is it a spirit?" "It's a man," said the second man. "I think it's a man." Suddenly, Nunez understood. He remembered stories about this valley, and he felt excited. It was a long and dangerous fall from the mountain, but here he was, in the country of the blind. "He comes from the rocks," said the third man. "He walked out of the rocks and came to our village." The 3 men moved, all at the same time. They stood in front of Nunez and put their hands on his face. They felt his ears, his nose, and his hair. One of them put his finger in Nunez's eye. "What is this?" one of them asked. To these men, Nunez's eye was a strange thing. They didn't understand it. "Be careful," said Nunez. "He speaks," said one of the men. "So he's not an animal, but he's from the rocks." "And now he's in the world," said another man. "I was in the world," said Nunez. "I came out of the world. I came from the world over the mountains, from Bogota, a very big city with thousands of people. People there can see. I can see." But the villagers didn't understand him. "See?" said one of the men. "What does he mean, Pedro? What is see? And there is no other world." "I remember stories about new men. They came out of the ground like flowers. Perhaps this is a man like that," said Pedro. "A new man, only 2 or 3 days old," said the other man. "Take him into the village," said Pedro. "But shout first, Correa, or the children will be afraid." So Correa shouted, and the other 2 men put their hands on Nunez's arms. They held on to him. Then they started walking with Nunez between them. "I can see the path," said Nunez. "You can take your hands away." But the men didn't take their hands away. Nunez could see the path, but they didn't know that. He could walk without their help. The men didn't understand this. Some of the women and children arrived. They wanted to meet the strange man. They all wanted to feel his face with their fingers. "He's a new man. He came from out of the rocks," Pedro said to them. "He's learning language. He uses strange words.